Like, so somebody can be reluctant, they don't want to do it. Is there a claim?
It means that they are like, if you are doing something, although you're reluctant, so it means that there is something that forces you to get into the.
Do the facts tell you that? That they were compelled
But if you are
or
already
coerced?
like logically, if you are doing, like, if you are maintaining the contract with somebody, although you're still like feeling like not really comfort, but it means that something is preventing you to go and contract with somebody else, and it means there is some force over you, regardless of what type of force is it.
But it has to fit within the criteria. And like, so not everything that a client feels is actionable. So here, reluctance is not in itself actionable. It doesn't lead to,
Then
or
why they continue like the contractual relationship with that party, like,
well, and that's why I'm asking, like, you're seeing economic duress from it, but it's hard to pull that out. You're sort of inferring from it. Well, if they were reluctant to go into the agreement, then something must have coerced them.
yes.
But within the parameters of contract law, when we're looking at coercion, we're looking at economic duress, a vitiating factor, and the criteria have to be met. So while they may have reluctantly entered into the agreement, does that ground in action in itself? And it wouldn't. Ebra?
But I'm not gonna comment on the
Yep.
economic duress.
That's fine.
I didn't find the case, but it's the English case where after the Second World War, where,
High trees.
Sorry?
Promissory estoppel?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where the other company agreed
Yeah.
to lower the rents.
Central properties versus high trees.
Yeah, for a certain time, but after the war has ended,
Yeah.
yeah, they had the right to like back to the same situation
Right.
it was before the war.
Okay.
So that's gonna be my argument about this case.
Okay. So let me ask then, does promissory estoppel apply here?
No.
Why?
Because there's no promise made.
No promise.
And also, it kind of reminds me of like the Williams-Roffrey case as well too, where pretty much when they had to deal with, pretty much when it came to the aspect of you can go contract other workers, essentially you can make the argument too that if you didn't like the price, you could have gone with another supplier.
Yeah. Well, that's more of an economic duress point though, right? Not really promissory estoppel. There wasn't a promise. Also, if you're arguing promissory estoppel here, you're using it as a cause of action. And the phrase I used was, you can only use promissory estoppel as a shield, not as a sword. So here it'd be used as a sword and not a shield. And in order to put that argument forward, you'd be relying on the Maher case from Australia and trying to argue why that case would apply in Canada in this situation, which would be more difficult to do. So what I'm saying is, you can put that forward, but keep in mind what the whole argument would be. You'd be relying on this authority from another Commonwealth jurisdiction and arguing why it would apply here.
Sorry, what's that Australian case?
Maher versus Walton Stores. It's in your notes. Because it was the only case that's used promissory estoppel as a sword, not as a shield.
Isn't it a question of bad faith?
How?
Well, the companies taking advantage of the fact that the price was temporarily raised
Yeah.
for the government issue, and they continued, once they knew that the market levels were the same, got normalized, they continued to charge you access to $3, which you could take a look as, well, not breach of contract, because they agreed to the raise in the price, but it was based on a temporary or
Yeah.
unknown circumstance, so I would think, even though it's very narrow, it would fall under bad faith.
I think you could argue good faith. I think you'll find oftentimes, especially in this class, with people with civil law backgrounds, I think good faith will often be an argument in contract. What I'd say, and I'll repeat what I said before, I would pair it with something more substantive.
Breach of contract.
So here, you could argue good faith, but is there a sort of a primary argument that would be stronger? Because I forget his name, but in the corner, he had his hand up a while ago. Yeah, you.
Yeah, just for completeness, if we in anticipation that if we sue the universal sue the WNC, then the WNC may raise promissory estoppel as a defense. Whether we should analyze this issue.
You could flag it, but the facts are left purposely in this position. So it would be something you could raise as a further potential, but there are more immediate responses that could be brought up. Abra, you had your hand up, and that'll continue.
Yeah, I wanted to, like to say, can we replace the argument of good faith by the misrepresentation?
So what's the criteria for misrepresentation? A false, unambiguous statement of fact that induce the other party to enter into a contract.
Okay, but the statement was that they have like to raise the price to $13 per box.
Yep,
Yeah, in order for them to keep like supply.
right.
Okay, and after that, the other company, Universal, discovered that they can like replace the material, and so mainly they don't have like to raise it to 13. So
Yeah,
can
but-
we consider that as like a statement of misrepresentation because they don't need to raise it?
It's not really a misrepresentation, though, because they're not saying we're maintaining the higher price, for example, because supplies are short. They're just saying basically, we're not lowering the price. They're not, and that in itself is not a misrepresentation.
Just in which-
If we were doing property, sure. But,
Well, the question is, they changed the conditions of the contract, right?
well,
Temporary,
yeah, but they
because
didn't,
of the conditions.
yeah.
And later on, they say that it was not temporary, this
They don't
change.
want to lower it.
They
so
don't
the
want
question
to
is,
get
can
back
they-
to the original.
Yeah, they
They
don't,
don't want to get back to the original price.
yeah.
No,
Okay, I thought we were going somewhere. Constantina.
Can we argue absence of consideration, even though there is no economic loss?
How?
yes,
Because I think you said that the other party promises to fulfill his contractual obligations.
Notified supplies for nothing.
Yeah, so we increase, the one party increases the promises to pay more, but the other party promises to do what he has already promised to do under the contract.
Okay,
There's no
yes,
new
yes, there is
consideration.
for the extra,
So let-
for the extra $3, there is no
Yes, but the other person
consideration.
does not give something.
Yes, exactly.
so let's break that down. In the analogy to the Williams and Rafi brothers case was noted before. So let's separate this into 3 events, factually. They sign the contract, they vary the price because of a shortage, and then supplies return to normal. three separate instances. And Constantina asks us, can we analyze this based on consideration? So, the initial contract being signed, was there consideration?
Yes.
Yes.
Sure.
The second event, when supplies go down and the price is raised by $3 per box, is there consideration?
No, absolutely not.
What about a practical benefit?
Yeah,
Yeah,
I think there
maybe.
is, yeah, the practical benefit is.
Practical benefit to get 1,000 boxes that were already contracted out.
Yeah, but there was on the market you couldn't get, you know,
Well, the
it's a
change
short-
of circumstances cannot change the contract, this is what they agreed on.
But this is where, if you recall our discussion about Williams, the idea of a practical benefit really opens up what is meant by consideration. And I'm not saying I'm endorsing it, what I'm saying is, in terms of practice, it makes the job a bit harder. Because arguably here, I forget who's who. Who's buying? Woodrow? Woodrow is buying, and it's hard for Woodrow to say to Universal, there's no consideration, because, thinking back to Williams and Rafi, Woodrow's getting the practical benefit of not having to look for another supplier or multiple suppliers to get that same amount.
But for the idea of practical benefit, I do clearly remember that in that specific class you mentioned that to argue practical benefit, there should be some subcontract.
There
But
is.
But here, like, what?
There's an original contract. That's what I said.
Like William and Rafi, there were two, like, the original contract, and the other party, like, contracted with somebody else, subcontractor, but here,
No.
the contract is
No,
only like.
Williams and Rafi brothers, if you want to look at Williams and Rafi as two contracts, the original contract to do the work, and then, what was it, £8,000 per per unit completed? We could see that as two contracts, but they were with the same parties, same as here.
No, the difference was like, because one of the parties just contracted with somebody else, there was like subcontract with somebody else.
No, I know that, but the main contractor, Rafi Brothers, had contracted with Williams to do the carpentry. Williams was doing it but ran out of money. So what, Rafi said, I'll pay you X amount per unit. So the contract was still the same between the same parties. There was no going outside. The Court of Appeal said part of the practical benefit, or one aspect of practical benefit, was Rafi Brothers did not have to go look for another carpenter. And we had talked about that because I'd raised the query, how is this a practical benefit if Williams can't perform the work and is going out of business? What's the benefit of being stuck with that one? So it wasn't a separate party. It was the same ones.
But there's almost a third contract, because you've got the initial contract, you have the period when the conditions were unstable, and then the conditions stabilize.
Yeah, so we'll get to that in a minute.
Yeah, okay.
So
high trees is what I'm coming to, when the conditions stable after the war.
but that'll be using as a sword.
But the conditions have stabilized.
Yeah, but you're still using promissory estoppel as a cause of action.
Well, I'm more concerned with, there's a very recent decision in the BC Court of Appeal,
Okay.
which actually spells out that when there's a change of condition, except for economic duress and fraud, etc.,
Yeah.
then you resort back to that condition. And I can read the decision to you, a very short decision.
No.
But if you don't know it, I can read it out.
No, I'm afraid of
It's a very
losing
late,
people.
it's a very late decision, which to me solidified as.
Okay, but, and I'm not querying that, just based on what we've done, that's all I can ask people to apply. So based on what we've done, focusing on the change of the circumstance in terms of the price, the idea of the practical benefit, just to close that off. So the argument can be that there was consideration for the extra $3 per box because of the practical benefit argument. And to be clear, what is the practical benefit? They don't have to look for another supplier or multiple suppliers.
In time of shortage.
Yeah, so there arguably would be consideration. So going back to that framework that I talked about, Woodrow comes to you, or Universal, sorry, comes to you and asks, what can be done? And you're saying, well, this is likely a strong argument to say that there was consideration for the higher price at this point in time, the shortage period.
Yes, okay.
And then, so then we have a separate issue of, can that higher price be maintained? And again, Konstantina said, can we analyze this through consideration? So we apply the same idea. Is there consideration for the higher price once supplies return to normal? What do you think?
No.
Is there no practical benefit argument?
It's easy to find an argument.
Well, what I was trying to say, well, first of all, what's the contract? We had initial contract, and going with the practical benefit as an additional consideration,
For the $3 per box higher?
yeah, it's 30% of the value.
Okay,
It's a humongous increase of the price.
okay.
Yeah.
But,
So on what basis, now, when we said, well, there is a consideration and practical benefit, on what basis we can return that second contract into first contract?
the third one.
The third one, which would be the normal one, the
Yeah.
original one.
So the question is, how can we go back to the original price if we've already agreed, I guess, to the higher
Yeah,
price?
but it is just a temporary agreement for the circumstances. no?
Yep.
In your wording we have,
Sorry, I can't quite hear you.
so in your wording we have, in order to maintain the order, so this price was increased specifically, if you're looking in your wording, was this increase, it was only for this specific situation, otherwise they can, so we can have, now we are back to the previous situation.
Okay.
So you can maintain the order with a lower price.
So the consideration, again, is just for that period, is the argument. And the argument at the third event, what I call it, the supplies return to normal, is contingent on the higher price being for a limited period of time. But that's still, the question remains, what I'd asked before, is there still a practical benefit argument to keep the price at a higher level?
No, there's a kind of easier way to analyze this potentially. Is
Okay.
there potentially an implied term that was only going to subsist for the period of time that supplies were abnormal?
How would you argue that?
Simply that the parties that the intention of the party was really to temporarily enter into that arrangement pending the return of supplies. It was never their objectively viewed or whatever. It was never their intention to pay 30% more unless it was necessary.
Do you have cases or authority to
Well,
help?
it's all these cases on implied terms. I don't, it's just requires one to be an innocent bystander, look at it. What was their intention when they agreed to that variation?
Yeah, so I think the argument is that this is an implied term in fact, not
Yes.
in law. And we have a couple of tests with the Moorcock, then we have Sure Law. But The idea is that without this, the contract wouldn't work. So the Moorcock, just for illustration purposes, the Moorcock, the idea was they're renting, if you forgive the way I'm phrasing this, renting a parking spot for a boat. And implied within that is that you can actually park your boat there without hitting the ground of the Thames River and ruining the hull of your boat. So it's, I understand what you're arguing. What I'm asking is, how do you draw that into here? And the reason why I ask is, we didn't see it work in Williams and Roffey Brothers. Maybe to put it a simple way. And going to Dayon's point, you know, the price increase, I fully understand it can be outrageous when looked at from sort of a business point of view, if we call it that. But I think the decision in Williams and Roffey Brothers is in itself somewhat outrageous, because they're basically paying twice for the same work.
Oh, but if I may,
Yeah.
just ask, I don't remember the facts.
Yeah.
The Roofing Brothers, there was no protest of Williams about increased price.
No, that's
There
why it
was no
wasn't,
He just came and pulled out the wallet and say, here you go, it's
Yeah,
yours.
but
Here, there is a protest. They protested on the increase of the price from the get-go. So we said that, you know, economic duress may not be the most appropriate point to argue, but obviously there is a protest on unilaterally, you know, imposed new price that we said was for a practical benefit, but there was a protest. There was a notice.
okay, but what, I don't understand, so they didn't like it. So they protested, but like, what does that ground?
Well, my point is that there was no consideration for the second contract.
Okay.
They shouldn't be paying.
But why? Why, based on your analysis of the law?
Because
Well,
in the
it's
minute
the
there is no,
Fredericton Airport. The airport said yes
Yes.
under protest, and then they didn't want to pay.
But that was economic duress. That
yes,
isn't,
but here, they agreed because of the shortage, but once the shortage was ended,
okay, but where is the economic duress? In order to rely on NAV, you have to have the criteria for economic duress here.
I'm not saying there is an economic.
No, but like, so we don't have one party saying, I'm not going to perform unless you pay me more, which is what happened in NAV, more or less. Specifically it was, if you don't buy this extra equipment, we're not going to continue performing our end of the contract to provide, what was it, satellite services or something. So there is nothing there to ground that aspect. Sorry,
Isn't it implied by virtue of?
isn't what implied, sorry.
We can't supply at $10 if you don't pay $13, we're not going to supply. That must be the implication of the proposal. I'm just.
I understand that, but that's not what we get from the cases. And without some, like, again, Williams and Roffey Brothers, there is nothing stated, just a minute, there is nothing stated, pay me more, I'm going out of business. It was freely offered by Roffey Brothers. And we have to be very careful with this implied argument, implying things. If you recall when I talked about implied terms, it's a power the court can use, but it uses it sparingly, because basically it is something that, it is a power that the court is saying, we can come in and correct your contract. But that really is quite a bit of interference that the courts generally, in terms of, under the umbrella of implied terms, are reluctant to do unless it is in specific circumstances. That's why I was saying, like the implied in fact, implied in law.
I guess this was a separate, I used the word implied a bit loosely, I guess, with, I mean, the second time round
Yeah.
is that essentially we're pressuring you to pay $13 or we're not supplying.
Okay, but what's the difference between hard bargaining and economic duress? It seems as though the difference is somebody threatening not to perform their end of the contract.
Can I just ask out of interest, when you assess this sort of question, and it sounds to me like you're going to be a bit critical of someone posing, if it's supported, in other words, if I were to argue, you know, here's the test for implied term,
Yeah.
I'm applying the test, it's a possible answer, but it's not your model answer.
I really don't like that question, frankly. I find it insulting, to be honest.
Insulting in what way?
Because you're saying, if I don't get your answer, will you be open to my answer? Yes, it is what you're saying.
I'm asking if this is a reasonable option. How would you
Yeah,
assess
no, I was answering your question, but your question was, if, let's be careful about the words you used. I get the impression you're going to be critical of someone that doesn't get your answer.
No.
I take offense to that.
I
I take offense to that. End of story. I'll answer your question. Yes, I'm open to other interpretations, but it has to validly apply the law. That's what I'm saying. So if you want to use the implied term, that's fine. But I'm not looking for my answer. And I will argue against that wording every day until the end of time. It incenses me when that language is used. And I hope it's clear. I'm not putting up with it. Whatever you think you said.
David,
Balcar.
just
Balcar.
to interject.
Balcar.
If you don't mind, I can speak
After.
after.
Well, I mean, we just come back to the economic duress part. When we refer to like just Williams and Walfrey Brothers in that case too, I think one leading factor why I said there wasn't economic duress in that case was because Williams never threatened to stop working. Whereas
Yeah. Tamesh.
Yeah, I'm just concerned, following up from my friend's opinion or question. I had asked about the latest decision, and you were, just let me finish, you were of the opinion that, and you expressed that we should more or less stick to the course material. So I'm asking, if we go beyond that, is it going to be not marked at all as scoring anything, or is it going to be punitive?
No. But I think what you're asking is unfair to other people, in that if you look up a case that's recent and use it, I can't then expect people to use that case. That's what I'm referring to with what I'm saying we did in the course. It's a matter of fairness. Let me finish now. If you find another case that you feel applies, you can use it. And if it's accurate, you be rewarded for it. But I cannot expect people to troll through Candly looking for newer cases. That is an unfairness that I was referring to. So based on the course materials, that's what we've done. I can only expect that. I cannot expect people to do further research.
So how? In an exam situation,
So,
how can you do any research?
I don't know how that wasn't clear, but I've tried to put everybody as much as possible on the same level.
So I'm getting it that I should restrict my answer to what you've taught. I mean, it's really coming down to that, because, I mean, you're making a
that's-
statement that it's really, although you said that if you have extra and it can be proven relevant to the point, then you'll be getting extra mark, but
Yeah.
you don't seem to be too keen in that. I mean, thinking outside of the lecture box.
I think that's a mischaracterization of what I said. And I would challenge you to show that I say something different. This is not a matter of me saying you can't think out of the box. This was a matter of, you found a case, recently decided. There is no way I can expect people to have that in their answer. Absolutely no way. And frankly, if you were teaching and roles were reversed and you expected that, I would appeal and I'd win. Because it was beyond the course material. That's what I'm looking at. I think it's a very simple, discrete point. It's not saying you will be penalized at all. But I'm also not going to presume that just because you found the case, that it is accurately applied. That's why I added the qualifier.
Excuse me. Could you correct me? So in this scenario, appropriate answer and argument would be practical benefit, one, then the promissory estoppel.
No.
No, which does not apply.
No.
So promissory estoppel, no. Just a focus would be practical benefit.
Consideration.
Practical benefit is not consideration.
So
I have a question about the practical benefit. Can it be divided in two stages? Because that is the main issue in there. Like in stage 2, when there was a shortage.
Yeah,
then
but that's how I divided it, right?
Yes.
The three separate events.
Yes, and
Right.
then we
But,
didn't get the.
Now, I am not clear to the third stage.
Yeah, we hadn't completed.
Yes, that's it, that's why we got lost because of this argument.
I was asking, is there a practical benefit argument?
Yes, to the second stage, yes.
And then the question was posed, can we use a simpler way with the implied term? Fine. I'm not sure how that would work, and I was pressing on how that would work. And that, we left it at that.
Yeah, can we say that the implied term was that all this price raise is only until the shortage?
I have a tough time seeing how that would work right now, just because
Because of consideration.
you're saying the court would say, well, they really meant this price. And the implied term is not about something like a core term. That's why I was repeating the facts of the Moorcock. The Moorcock is about if you're offering a parking space for your ship, there must be implied within that you can park your ship without damaging it.
Yes.
An analogy today would be you can park your car in this parking spot without damaging the undercarriage. And that's different from the implied, that there's an implication about the price. It's such a, I don't know if I'm explaining it well enough, but I don't see a court implying about anything about a price.
Okay. No, it's not really the point.
That we meant this price. But again, that's why I was asking what would be the argument. I'm overlooking something. If I'm overlooking something on that, yeah.
Actually, I would like to say, to ask whether there are two other possible alternatives. One is the oral evidence rules, because based on the fact policies, like there's no subsidy written agreement. We just say that agree. And another possibility I want to approach is whether there could be other mistaken assumption as to the events lead to the shortage in the market, so that they say that if there is a mistake that hit the ground and the roof of the contract, so that the contract.
If there was a mistake about the shortage, we'd have, I don't think the facts necessarily support that there's a mistake about the shortage.
There was not a mutual mistake.
In what way, sorry?
About the shortage.
Probably it was a really short.
In the third stage.
Oh, sorry, yeah, in the third stage, there is no shortage, yeah.
The third one or the second one?
I don't know, I was going off of what he was saying.
I just think that there's a common mistake because this information and public information to both sides, so it means that both sides are the same page. There is a government investigation, there is shortage in the amount.
Yeah, at the second stage, you're referring to?
Yes.
Yeah, I don't think there are facts to say that that was a question. That there was the price was raised illegitimately.
Yeah, so I think the difference is whether they are mistaken about how long the situation will last. Whether it's permanently changed or just
Right.
event, so that this could be arguable because maybe both sides are mistaken on this issue. When they
But how, like, I don't want to belabor the point, it's not clear how there's a mistake.
I mean, it's pivotal for the events because there is an amendment to the contract.
Yeah, I understand that, but,
And the reason for the amendment is because both sides maybe have some mistaken ideas about
I understand
how
that.
the market will change in the future.
But how do the facts suggest that there's a mistake? That's really the question.
So
In that final stage where supplies return to normal.
it's because there is a government investigation. So this investigation actually,
But that's the second stage.
at the third stage, the investigation, the outcome of the investigation verify and confirm that actually those periods of concern are not existing.
Yeah, so, and the party wants to keep the price at the higher level, the other one doesn't. The question is, can the price be kept at the higher level?
From the buyer's point perspective, there is a mistake and the buyer can proceed to try to argue for rescission of the contract for the second contract, which amended the original.
Sorry?
Because the second contract is entered into the mistaken belief.
Where's the mistake?
But I keep asking you, where's the mistake?
The mistake is the fact that there was a problem with the sleeping on was the fact,
So the furthest I can go is that at the time when the amend original contract, the status of affairs is not clear.
It was
So they
It's
make
clear, I mean, the
Yeah.
fact says it very clear.
This change will be permanent, but actually it turned out that it's just a short-lived
I
market
understand what you're saying.
volatile event.
Sorry?
I think he's trying to, are you trying to say that we weren't, because they didn't know when this issue is gonna be resolved? Is that what you're saying from the state? Both parties didn't
I
know
think
this issue is gonna be resolved?
yeah, the dreaming effect is that there
So
is
what's
a
the
rumor
parallel
that
difference?
the material they
Lies
use is
here?
cancerous. And this caused some government investigation, and this caused the shortage of supply of this material, and this translates to the rise of market, the price.
Right.
But this rumor turned out is baseless. So that means the government's investigation cleaned the rumor, the theory.
But, okay, but where both parties believed this to be the case and operated on it, they had no other reason to think about it, to think otherwise. Right?
Let's put it simply that if the whole sequence of events start with this, maybe the market rumor said that this material is cancerous, and this triggered the government investigation. And this investigation maybe took some strain on the supply of materials. This translates to a rise in the price.
Yeah.
This is the reason they amend the original contract.
Yeah.
But this original event, which is the rumor, is untrue.
Okay.
So the public can argue that they amend the contract because of the mistaken.
But I think the difference is mistake as a non-legal term, and if you need to go, you can go. Mistake as a non-legal term and mistake as a legal term. And the questions I'm asking is, mistake in contract law, how do you find that here? And I think what you're saying is, they may have raised the price for mistaken purposes, but that's not through mistake contract law, is what that's what I don't understand from you. It may have been a rumor that was disproved, I think is your argument, but that's not a mistake that would, in contract, vitiate consent.
But if these mistakes are shared by both sides, can we say it's a common mistake as to the circumstance?
Sure, but in common mistake, it actually has to be a fact that it was a mistake.
Yeah, I know, but we can say that the existence of market rumor itself is a fact.
No,
But it isn't a
But it's
rumor,
nothing, yeah.
and we don't have to manipulate the facts which are written. That's an exam question. That's the fact.
Considers imperial tobacco, I think. But even the
I don't see how.
I don't understand actually.
What's the end of this case? Please, I will be not able to sleep. Explain what's the end of this case.
Professor, excuse me, would you, if possible, until tomorrow, would you provide kind of very minor, small answer?
Well, what I was trying to get at was, I think it'd be,
Somehow I'm confused.
Yes, please.
what I'm trying to get at is, I think it'd be hard to argue that the higher price should be maintained, that there'd be a strong argument for a lack of consideration for the higher price to be maintained. But there's a difficulty in terms of the practical benefit. And I was wondering how people would deal with that, and that's really all where I got to. Yeah.
David, I came to the conclusion that given the argument about lack of consideration, and maybe there was a practical benefit, that the lack of fresh consideration is not a determinative position. You can argue that there are benefits that resemble or are equivalent to consideration. So in other words, if you're trying to say, look, somehow going back to Rafi, that there are practical benefits even at the end, at the third stage, but that's not determinative, because in a real life situation, it may not, it's up to the court to decide whether it reaches that standard of a consideration.
Sure, but the court would be persuaded by the arguments, right? Like, my personal feeling, which I think is beside the point on this, it's just, it seems hard to argue that there was consideration for the third event. But the idea of the practical benefit, can you say something like, well, they don't have to look for another supplier now? Is that a valid argument for practical benefit? That's what I'm putting to people. I'm not sure. But your point, it'd be up to the court. That's exactly what I'm going by. This idea of a practical benefit seems to be so elastic that it really unsettles the idea of consideration. What we thought it was before Williams. So this is where this question gets at. So promissory estoppel wouldn't be able to be used because it'd be as a sword, not as a shield. Economic duress, I don't see how the criteria fit. The argument of implied terms. I'm not sure how the courts would imply the price.
Not the price, but the condition that it only applies
Or-
until
Yeah, but
I mean,
like
it's
dealing with
more
the,
the time
but
term, which I would say that.
dealing with the price, and like outside of reasonable price and things like that, or a mechanism, that's what I'm not sure of. If there's an argument for that, fine, but
My
I'm not
argument
sure.
would be that when they raised the price, raising the price was argued by the shortage. So since the shortage finished, the price, the implied term
Right,
is
but-
that this is only until the shortage.
Right.
And then the price has to discuss again mutually, and not. What?
I think that's too much of a presumption that something like that would have to be expressed, that we are going to.
I'm not saying it's a strong argument.
Yeah.
Really, practically, can I ask something? I just
Yeah.
don't understand practically. You can finish a contract, right? Terminate the contract.
Yeah.
So if you don't like the new price, the company just can say that, okay, within 30 days or 90 days or whatever, I just terminate the contract and I look for a new supplier and that's it, right?
Sure.
So practically, probably, why would you go to court? You don't like this contract?
Spend money, yeah.
You cannot agree on the
Yannick,
price,
and
you
then Ehan.
terminate the contract.
Sorry, Yannick and then Ehan?
Yeah, so, could we argue that we are maintaining the initial contract and, WNC has reached that condition because the price is like at the root of the contract?
Yeah, like nothing has been, it's sort of at this vague time, like nothing's been done. What I mean by that is, like they're maintaining the higher price, they're not saying, pay me the higher price or I won't deliver. Like nothing's being threatened or anything.
Right, but now you're introducing something new to the contract, it's now $13. You're not maintaining the 10.
Yeah,
Yeah.
which is the consideration argument.
So in order to flag up breach of a condition, I will have to be saying, okay, there's no consideration for, you're
Well,
saying it can't stand by itself.
yeah. In order to be a breach of a condition, it'd have to be a condition. So without,
The price,
yeah, to maintain the higher price, there'd have to be consideration. Making it a condition, if that makes sense.
yeah.
Aeon?
I'm wondering, should the consideration be present in every stage of the contract? In here, we are dividing the facts into three.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, in the two step, there are considerations, but in the last stage, we are not sure if there is consideration or not. Is it necessary to look to the whole of the contract for consideration? For the beginning, they may be present, but by the end of the term,
Right, but it's not about the whole contract per se. So there is a variation. Was there consideration for the variation? So something more is requested. Is there consideration for that something more?
but the variation is not related with the parties of the contract. It's the variation is regarding the supply of the
But it
stickers.
affects the parties to the contract.
But if I make a contract with
Yeah.
someone,
Yeah,
the events can always change and affect my contract.
right.
Is it necessary in every stage to find the consideration?
There has to be consideration. So if you amend it, if you say, well, now I need to charge you more, what's the consideration? Or you can agree to it. They agreed here to it. When it returns to normal, they could agree to, okay, I'll continue paying 13. But the question is, are they obliged to pay the 13? And the argument against it would be, I don't have to pay 13 because there's a failure of consideration for the extra $3 per packet.
So what's the answer?
Situation, that's it.
Yeah.
That's,
Yeah, sorry, Tamesh, and then I'll come back.
So David,
If you as I said, if you have to go, you can go.
look, we are at a stage where is this an established principle that for a variation of terms of a contract, one needs fresh or new consideration? If we start off from that position,
Yes.
what I'm saying, that the most recent case, Rosas versus Toka 2018 BCCA, I'm reading, the appeal changed a well-established and settled notion that a variation of the existing contract is not enforceable without new or fresh consideration being granted in exchange for the variation. What I want to be careful about is that we're not being misled in a concept of a principle.
How are you doing this?
Because if this is